Welcome to the program. My guest today is Ken Rogers, the acting deputy CIO for business management and planning at the State Department. Ken, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you.
So let's start with some basics. First of all, as the acting deputy CIO for business management and planning, let's just talk about what your role is a little bit. Give me the 50,000 foot view.
Yeah, sure. So my role is strategy, architecture, portfolio management, governance, strategic workforce planning, acquisitions. I think I got it all. So I think and plan about IT. I actually don't implement it, but I make sure we have the out year vision and the right roadmap to get us to where we need to be and the resources to make that happen. So what that means is I directly manage about $1 billion IT budget for the CIO, and I provide governance oversight, the capital planning, investment control oversight of a $3 billion portfolio or $2.5 to $3 billion IT portfolio department-wide.
All right, that's a great summation. Let me start, since you're in charge of the strategy side, the thinking side. Let's just jump right in and talk a little bit about that strategy. IT modernization is one of those topics you can't get away from, right? Every conference, every CIO, every agency is under the gun. So maybe just talk a little bit about the Department of State's IT modernization strategy and maybe talk a little bit about how it's different than maybe in the past.
Yeah. So kind of in a nutshell, our strategy is really focused on moving away from buy, build, maintain to consuming IT as a service and really switching towards focusing on that customer experience. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we're aiming to do over the next 3 to 5 years. We have gone through a comprehensive review, analysis, fact-finding across the department in 17 and 18 to identify what we need to do in order to do IT differently at the department. And a lot of that is pull back in a lot of the decentralized activity and centralize that in through a shared service process. It's a fundamental paradigm shift to how we have been doing IT over the past decade or so.
One thing about the State Department, and as you mentioned, it's been decentralized for a long time. And that to me has been the biggest challenge. A lot of agencies have this, Interior, Agriculture Department. You're starting to see this as a trend. How are you guys going about that, moving from decentralized to centralized? Because as you well know, nobody wants to stop hugging their server, as an analogy.
So yeah, obviously there's a need for a lot of our systems in terms of the design and development to be close to the mission of the organization. But in terms of consuming commodity IT, how do we strengthen our service offering of infrastructure and platform to those business owners so they don't have a huge heavy lift of basic stuff that should be commoditized, gain the cost savings, leverage those cost savings, and building into those systems and services for the mission, greater richness, greater capabilities, and so forth. So that's kind of the primary way we're approaching it at this point. There still is a significant need for the business side of the organization to really understand what their business requirements are and how to best leverage those business requirements with modern technology.
So in many ways, you're just trying to make technology, and I'll use the analogy we've heard many times, like electricity, where they can just plug in and they'll play. So they can worry as much about, okay, how do we meet the mission, not worry about what's the back end infrastructure look like.
Exactly.
And is that the shared service side of it too, where, hey, we're going to, and I'm obviously going to make this up a little bit, but we're going to have this series of clouds that you can access, or this series of applications. Here's a big long list. Pick one that meets your needs, but don't go outside of this highway guardrail.
Yeah. So we've really been at the cloud journey for the past 8 years. We implemented cloud as a strategy back in 2010, and since then we've really seen our customers across the department kind of vote with their pocketbook. Which platforms work for them? How do they leverage that? What value proposition does it offer? So now we're really pivoting from cloud first thinking to an optimized cloud approach. How do we now increase the value proposition of cloud by optimizing what we're doing? And that really is delivering a secure infrastructure and platform to the department and pushing up our our customers to that SaaS layer where they have a lighter lift and a huge potential for cost savings, create efficiencies, remove some of the friction. One of the things we're really driving hard towards are enterprise licensing agreements, cloud service provider agreements. So for every initiative that we have, having to have that lead time of doing their own procurement really drives a lot of the modernization out a year or two in the process. So how do we bring that back in, make those vehicles available to them, stand up a DevOps, a dev environment for our customers to really work through their requirements, and then drive that towards a production environment.
In many ways, what you're trying to do is remove the focus on that back end and say, hey, mission folks, just focus on what you need to do. And we're going to stay out of your way. We're going to make things easy. And we're going to remove, if you will, the complexity that has been there for so long. And I think your comment of moving from cloud first to really cloud optimization is something that I'm hearing time and again from agencies across the government. Is that kind of the part of that evolution of cloud, you think?
I think so. We're of course, as a part of Fatara, looking at our data centers and data center optimization and consolidation. We over the past 8 years, we've gone from tiptoeing into the cloud space to actually confronting cloud sprawl. So how do we get that value proposition back in by having elastic cloud environments we're scaling rather than standing up duplicative infrastructure environments, because it does provide a value to the customer. So yeah, I think we need to get to the place where we're really leveraging the value proposition of cloud.
You bring up cloud sprawl. That's interesting because that was the big concern years ago. I remember people saying, well, let's not have it same thing happen like what we saw with kind of multiple data centers or multiple where every data center had 10 to 20 to 30% utilization, and people just, instead of saying, well, let me better utilize what we have, but I'll just add another server. It's almost, I know the cloud utilization is a little different, but it's that same concept of let me just add another cloud versus see what I can have access to. Has that been a difficult issue so far to address kind of that cloud sprawl?
There's a very similar behavior pattern of my data center folks loving their blinking lights and their server racks. I remember back when I was at DHS, my CISO going into a server room and hugging his trusted internet connection rack. I mean, and so we see that same thing happening with cloud. I can get to the cloud. I've got my infrastructure. I can isolate my data. I can manage my environment, and I can, from that bureau perspective, limit some of my risk. I think the problem that creates is really at the data layer, where am I really getting the value proposition of my data when I'm isolating that data in one-off production environments in various cloud with various cloud service providers. So this is a real opportunity to do real modernization, and I think one of the biggest value propositions out there when you move away from the cost piece is the data. What are we doing with our data?
Data we'll get to in a little bit later in the
Sure.
show, I think. But let me just back up for a second. One of the things that I think the State Department is facing, I think a lot of agencies are facing, and I want to dig maybe a little deeper into the cloud sprawl issue. When you counted how many clouds, and we'll use this in quotes, right, for our audience that can't see us, the air quotes, how many did you find? And then how hard was that conversation to say, we have too many, how do we just reduce the number or at least consolidate them in some way, the way we manage them maybe?
So we haven't begun. We've done the count. We have not started the consolidation. The initiative, taking a few steps back, the initiative in FY17 and 18 was to acknowledge the current challenge that we have. So back in June of this year, the CIO published the department's enterprise cloud strategy, really taking that goal in our 17 and 19 strategic plan of cloud first, that optimized cloud strategy. This is the how we're going to do this to get that value proposition. So for the first time, the department now has a roadmap, if you will, to articulate to the department where we're going. So that was a first step, and the cloud strategy was developed through my office in partnership with the bureaus across the department. Part of what my office runs is the investment review board and an advisory board that oversees is that whole eGov governance across the department. So we vetted this across the department. We got input. We talked about the value proposition, and you can't really consolidate until you have a place for them to go. So the first step in that process this year was to work on an acquisition strategy that lined up with a multi-vendor approach towards a cloud ecosystem at state, and really looking at what do we have and how do we leverage this, and then how do we secure this multi-cloud environment with some of the production stuff that's out there, so we really have a go-to strategy for our bureau customers, so they have a place to go. So in FY19, we'll be really launching into how do we take that next step of consolidating all the one-off contracts that for cloud services into the enterprise service agreements that we have. And then phase 2 of that would be to start optimizing those environments. So optimizing the actual environments so that we can get the cost savings we're looking for.
All right, so you answered one of my questions. Multi-cloud, very important. That's a hot topic around the Defense Department. You've probably heard maybe a little bit about something called JEDI and the concerns there. We won't ask you to comment on that, of course. But so you guys are definitely doing multi-cloud, which is good. And then you mentioned potential acquisition strategy, which is, I know a lot of vendors listen to the show, so let's get ahead of them so they don't call you 101 times. Or they probably get that anyways. But what are you guys doing about the acquisition strategy around the multi-cloud environment? Do you have a plan yet? How about that?
We do have a plan, and we're aggressively pushing that plan out. But to just speak a little more general about acquisitions, one of the things that we're doing in partnership with our acquisition shop with the CIO shop and the acquisition shop is we've spent a lot of time focusing on IT acquisitions at the department. How do we optimize that? You can't do IT differently or optimize IT at a federal agency today without optimizing how you do IT acquisitions. So that is a big push. It's part of our IT strategic plan. It is part of our a number of goals that we have laid out over the next 4 years to focus on building an IT acquisition cadre at the department, understanding how to optimize our acquisition vehicles so they can be leveraged across the department, and of course look at the government vehicles that are there that we can leverage to create that same kind of efficiency.
All right, there's plenty to follow up. We're going to take a quick break so we can give you take a breath, and we can kind of talk about our next set of questions. My guest today is Ken Rogers, the Acting Deputy CIO for Business Management and Planning at the State Department. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Thundercat Technology and NetApp on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.